Good morning. So now that the San Antonio Spurs have completed three preseason games, what I did was for today's episode is I want to look at just some guiding questions, that I created and kind of answer those, just kind of getting an overall view of how the Spurs have been progressing here through the preseason and just some takeaways that I've kind of noticed here. So the first question I created, who will be in the starting lineup on opening night? So what we can see here is, Coach Pop hasn't deliberately said, who's going to be in the starting lineup come opening night against Dallas in about 2 weeks on October 24th. Well, he actually has been very clear in saying that Wemby's definitely going to start. So that was back on media day. So obviously Wemby's going to be a starter. If we look at just who Pop has had in the starting lineup through some of these preseason games, he's had in the two games where Chris Paul has been available to play in the games, he's been in the starting lineup. He's been the starting point guard. So obviously we think Chris Paul's going to start. And then the three players who have played in every single preseason game and started there at like the wing and forward positions are Julian Champagnie, Harrison Barnes, and Jeremy Sohan. So again, based on the evidence of these first three preseason games, it looks like this is going to be the starting lineup to start, the regular season here, unless something changes dramatically in these next two preseason games. With Champagnie basically getting that spot of Devin Vassell until Devin Vassell gets healthy enough, at some point, hopefully in November for the Spurs. One interesting thing that Coach Pop did was he actually had Keldon Johnson play with some of the Spurs starters in that last game against Utah for just for a few minutes. He let basically Keldon be in that Champagnie spot, even though Wemby was out. Obviously, Zach Collins started in his place. So again, that was just kind of interesting to watch Keldon basically play with most of the starters. But again, based on the overall observations of who Pop has had out there, it looks like Champagnie is going to be in the starting lineup along with Paul, along with Barnes, Sohan, and Wemby. So again, that's kind of what the starting lineup is probably going to look like here on opening night. The next question I created was, this is a little bit longer, so bear with me here. It's which players who weren't in the projected rotation before training camp need to get minutes this season. So again, this is a lot mainly based on how the players have played in training camp and the preseason games. So these are players who, that we didn't know for sure if those players were going to be in the rotation. Players like players like Stefan Castle, Chris Paul, Barnes, Sohan, Wemby, those guys are all going to be in the rotation. It's they were going to get minutes somewhere. So they weren't really fighting to get like a rotation spot. But there's other players who have played very well and really stuck out here in preseason. Three players specifically that I think that are going to end up, Pop's gonna have to figure out a way to get some minutes for these players if he wants to have them, out there on the floor. So one of those players is a player I've already talked about, Julian Champagnie. He's been starting at the wing for the Spurs, and he's been, a lights out, high volume shooter. I mean, that's the thing about him right now is his not only his accuracy is really good at 48%. He's making just threes right now in preseason games, but he's taking a lot of attempts, and most of those are good attempts. Chris Paul's finding him, different players are finding him. Who was it? Trey Jones kind of made a remark that preseason games they haven't the other teams haven't started scouting it because Champagnie's just getting tons of good looks out there, but he's taking advantage of it. I mean, he's averaging. I hadn't looked at the numbers yet, but just the fact that he's averaging 9 3-point attempts per game is that's a high volume shooter right there. And again, he right now he's basically filling in that role for Devin Vassell in terms of just that shooting guard spot. And so it'll be interesting whenever Devin gets healthy, if Champagnie's still in the starting lineup, to see if Pop, just move Champagnie to the bench, or if he has to move somebody else, one of the forwards, because he needs to have Vassell and Champagnie out there. So again, Champagnie's definitely been one of the bright spots for the team in terms of shooting the ball. And initially before training camp even started, I thought he would make the 10-man rotation, whether that was in the starting lineup or getting minutes off the bench. So he's definitely looks like he's definitely going to need minutes here, and obviously he looks like he's going to be the starting shooting guard. Another player who's been really impressive in training camp is Sandro Mamukelashvili, Mamu. Just again for him as well, the outside shooting that he's bringing right now in the preseason and the ball movement. So he's averaging 5.3 3-point attempts per game in the preseason, and he's making 56% of them. He talked about how he really, this offseason, he really just focused on his role, which is like rebounding, bringing energy out on the offensive end, moving the ball. And then, of course, he worked on his spot-up shooting, his catch and shoot threes, because he said he knew that, being a teammate of Wemby's going to draw so much attention. One of the things you need to be able to do is shoot quickly against the defense, the minute like the ball gets to you, if you're wide open out there. And so Mamu's definitely worked on that, it looks like, and it's showing, and he's actually putting in even more work. He talked about on Sunday how he's actually doing individual shot practices himself. So he'll, the Spurs will have their team practice, but then he might go to the the facility and work out the next, that same night. He says that basically he always wants to stay in rhythm. He always wants to stay hot out there from three. And so what this is creating, though, the fact that Mamu is playing so well is that, yes, he can be, a versatile player where Pop can put him, at the four to space the offense, or at the as like a small ball five. But it's like it's creating a question of, obviously you would assume that Zach Collins will be the backup five, just like how the season went last year, and Wemby will be the starting five. But again, if Collins, obviously, he's barely getting back from injury as well in the offseason. But if they both bring different things to the team, just that their skill sets. Zach is more, he's going to bring you more size, more height, plays a little bit more inside the perimeter. I know he's trying to, inside the arc. Near the paint, he has like those hooks. He has those finishes near the rim. He's working on his 3-point shot, but obviously, that's been a little bit rusty in his first game back. Whereas Mamu, that's the thing he's going to bring to your offense. He's going to bring you spacing. He's going to bring you outside shooting. And so that's where I wonder if Pop's going to kind of have a similar situation like he had last year with Doug McDermott and Jetty Osman, where maybe in a half, if Zach isn't, bringing that dynamic to the team, maybe he'll bring Mamu in the third quarter and fourth quarter, give him some minutes, or vice versa. Maybe start Mamu early and see if he can space out the offense. And if it's not working, then bring in Zach. Or maybe it's just matchup dependent. If they need more size out there, maybe they bring Zach in. But if not, if they need more spacing just to play a little bit quicker out there, maybe they bring Mamu. So I think that Mamu is going to definitely, just again, based on these 3 preseason games, he's definitely made himself an option where Pop might have to go to him and get some minutes from him somewhere there off the bench. Mamu. So Mamu's had a really good preseason so far through 3 games. And then another player who's playing at a very packed position is Blake Wesley. So obviously we know the Spurs have a lot of point guards on this roster. They have Chris Paul starting. They have Trey Jones off the bench. They also have Stephon Castle, who can handle the ball, and he's shown that he can run the offense as well. So then Wesley, he's actually been getting himself some minutes. He's been averaging 20 minutes a night in the preseason through 3 games. 4.7 points, 4 rebounds, 5.3 assists to just 0.7 turnovers and 1.7 steals. And so it's showing that, Pop wants him out there. He and Steph Castle, definitely the two of them together, they put a lot of ball pressure on the team trying to bring up the ball. They really, disrupt the other team's offense as they're trying to get into their sets. And that's something where in the first preseason game, Castle actually said, Coach Pop told he and Wesley, basically up the defense, bring up the defensive level there. And Trey Jones commented on how that's very contagious for all the other players out there. When they see Wesley, when they see Castle out here, really getting into guys and really pressuring the ball, it makes the other guards, play like that as well. And you saw that against the Jazz, where Pop actually had a 3-point guard lineup of Chris Paul, Steph Castle, and Trey Jones out there, and they were really disruptive out there on the wing against the Jazz defenders. So I think that Wesley is as well. He's basically earned himself some minutes, probably, where he might not be one of the first names off the bench in games, but he's going to be one of those players where if Pop needs just the game's going, it's kind of in the mud, it's very slow. If he needs some energy out there, he really needs the pace to pick up. He also needs ball pressure, and because the offense is just getting into their offense too easily, the opponents, then he can have Wesley and Castle out there together to really be disruptive. And Wesley's just talked about how going into year 3, the game's slowed down for him, and he's really focused on his role. He says that his role on offense is just basically get his teammates shots, make open threes if they're there, and then on defense, of course, just play defense, which is what he loves doing. So I think that those 3 players to me have really stuck out, where we didn't know for sure if they were going to be in the rotation this coming season, but I think those 3 players have done a great job in preseason so far through 3 games. Champagnie, Mamu, and Wesley of making themselves find a role somewhere in, whether off the bench or for Champagnie's case in the starting lineup. I think those 3 players have been pretty impressive here through 3 preseason games. Another question I created was which training camp player has stood out? So obviously, Coach Pop has been very deliberate about basically keeping most of the players who are going to be in the 10-round rotation in for the first 3 quarters of these preseason games. So he doesn't give the training camp players many minutes until the fourth quarter comes. And so usually when the fourth quarter comes, it's usually Riley Minix, Malachi Flynn, Brandon Boston Jr., and he only played in 1 game, but then he got waived, which was Nathan Mensah. And so of those players, though, I think Minix has definitely been the name. If you've been watching the Spurs games, he's definitely been the player who's been very efficient in his few minutes that he gets out there. So right now, when you actually look at his numbers in three preseason games, he's averaging 7.7 points in 7.8 minutes, so almost a point per shot he's averaging. He's putting up 2 threes per game, 2.3 threes per game, and making 57% of them. And so again, but before the opening night, the Spurs are going to have to make a call if they're either going to, these players on training camp contracts, they're either going to have to, for some of the younger players like Minix or maybe a guy like Brandon Boston Jr., there is one two-way spot there still. So maybe one of those players can earn that spot. Or, I mean, I don't think the Spurs would do this, but they could waive a player on a standard contract to open up a roster spot for one of these training camp players. But again, I don't think they'll go that route. I think if anything, it's going to probably be that training camp spot. Not that training camp spot. That two-way contract is up for grabs between Minix and Boston Jr. because they would be eligible for that kind of spot. And right now, Minix has been very impressive in his few minutes. Even Pop was commented about Minix, where he basically said, he didn't know who he was going into training camp, but he's really made him notice. He said those words, he's made me notice, is what Pop said there about Minix. And then another player who just got added on Sunday to the training camp roster is Isaiah Miller. But I think he's probably going to be a player who's probably going to be on the roster just for a short while, probably gets waived, and then that way he can play with the Austin Spurs in the G League is more so where I think that Isaiah Miller, a point guard, will end up playing in Austin this upcoming season. And then the final question I created was, it's this one. I said, what has the team emphasized in training camp and preseason? So this one I'm going to use more so what the players have said, because like I've kind of mentioned before, it's, you want to get some takeaways from preseason data, but it's really tough because, again, the players aren't in there during their normal minutes. A lot of times, a lot of players are out. Like if you think about the Spurs, one of their best player on the team is Wemby, and he's only been in one preseason game. So again, it's you don't want to put too much in the numbers that you see from the overall team numbers, because different players are in and out of games and things like that. But I would just say some takeaways that I've heard from the players. And what they really emphasize is they've been talking about defense, that Coach Pop has really been harping on defense, that's been one of their main areas of the court that they've been focused on this training camp. Even on Sunday, Trey Jones said that they really just honed it on defense. It's all they've been talking about in training camp. They haven't really been spent too much time on offense, and so that's interesting because one of the ways that Jones mentioned that they want to be better defensively this coming year is just being more active on defense, bringing more energy, bringing more hustle. For the guards, he mentioned players like Chris Paul, Stephon Castle, Blake Wesley. They want to bring more disruption to the other team's offense, where they want to put more pressure on those teams. They want to get into passing lanes, and they feel that they can do some of those things now because obviously they have Victor there in the paint ready to protect them in the event that their matchup gets by them. And then something else that Jeremy Sohan and Zach Collins have said is that they also need, the team needs to, the other four players on the court, they need to protect Victor, where if Victor's going in to swat an attempt or deter someone that's trying to drive, then they need to, the front court defenders and the other players on the team need to be ready to either cover his man or be ready to make rotations in case that the ball gets kicked back out, because obviously we've already seen this before, that Wemby makes players kick the ball back out, and the ball just flies around the perimeter because nobody wants to go inside against him. So again, I think that's just been the big takeaway in terms of what the players have said. And like I said, I don't want to dive too much into the numbers, but early on, obviously the steals numbers look pretty good for this team. They're very active defensively, 11.3 steals per game in 3 preseason games so far, which is 6th amongst the 30 teams in the preseason. Last year, the number was 6.3 for the Spurs per game, which was 22nd. So again, that's just one number you can look at. But like I said, a lot of times I don't want to look too much at the data because of how many players are out. I would also say that the Spurs' volume of threes is also something offensively that we've seen, where they're taking a lot more threes so far through 3 preseason games. But like I mentioned, Wemby's only been in 1 game. Also, Devin Vassell, one of their key shooters, has not been in any of these games yet because he's been injured. He'll come back, hopefully according to the team, or they don't have a timeline for Vassell, but he'll be reevaluated in early November, on November 1st. So just what I've seen so far, again, through 3 preseason games, 46% of their shot attempts are coming from 3, whereas last year that was 40%. So again, very early on, they are showing that they are taking more threes here in terms of their percentage of shots. But like I said, key players have been out. But again, that's just kind of where I wanted to go with that topic is, that question is, what have been some of the takeaways? And like I said, it's more so what the players are saying about defensively. Obviously the early preseason numbers do show that they're going to be better, but we have to actually wait and see until the games actually get here, the real games here in about 2 weeks. Because like I said, players have been kind of in and out of the lineup. And so that kind of just wraps up this episode. The Spurs have 2 preseason games remaining. On Tuesday this week, they play at Miami. And then on Thursday, they play at Houston. Then they have a few days off. And then the following week, on October 24th, is the official start of the regular season against the Dallas Mavericks.